No fate I dread. Isn't that beautiful? I pray that you know that this morning, that there is nothing that you have to fear because of who the Lord is in your heart and in your life. At this time, I'd like to introduce a dear friend, Lorna Ralston. Lorna and I, believe it or not, came to school here together, 2 years ago, was it? When we were? Yeah, okay. Maybe a few more than that. And it's just so neat the way that I find the older I get, the smaller the world becomes. And the more we just interact with other believers, and you just realize you know people all over the place, and it's just a lot of fun. I did not get to know Lorna that well while we were here at school. I sure knew her very well because you're just well known. I'll leave it at that. But it has been my joy over these last few years to be reunited with her and to get to know her even more. And I know that as she comes and she shares with you, I have seen the Lord work in and through her life in some pretty powerful ways. And it's been such an encouragement and testimony to my heart. And that is why I've asked her to come and share with us now.
I won't tell you what I thought of Mrs. McMahon. I've gotten to know her too and appreciate her now. When Beth contacted me last week, and I guess the old saying, preach, pray, or die on a moment's notice, that we had at Bible school is true. It really got me thinking. I thought back on the hope, and I said, what is the theme again? And she said, hope through tragedy. And I'm like, oh, she must think my life is really tragic. And so, anyway, I'm just going to give you a quick overview until I get to the tragic part. I was born and raised in a Christian home here in the province of New Brunswick in a small town. I was always active in the church, and I loved working anything I could do with children. And so after graduating from high school, I came to NBBI for 3 years, and during that time, I taught Good News Clubs and was introduced to a CEF missionary named Michael Ralston, and that's all he was at that point. After Bible school, I was invited to, because I'm from the Moncton area, I was invited to go and work out of the Moncton office as their secretary, and Michael happened to be in that office too, and we became friends. And then he got called to go to Italy, and he left me here in the province. Our whole love story is, there's funny parts, and there's beautiful parts, of course, but this isn't the theme, and it's not tragic. So next time there's a theme on love, I guess I could come back and share. Anyway, we corresponded for a number of years until he decided that he needed a wife to have a legitimate ministry in Italy. And the funny thing is, I didn't even make the short list, but I ended up being the one that God had chosen for him. Anyway, the whole thing was, when he did finally propose to me, it was at the time that his father had passed away and he had to come home quickly, and like I said, it's a whole other story for another time. But as he traveled home at that time, he talked to God, and he had all the outside pressures, and Michael's fear was that I would not like Italy, I wouldn't feel called to Italy, and he had seen too many missionaries on the field that their wife was there but wasn't there, and they ended up leaving the mission field, and he didn't want that. So God kind of gave him a little talking to and said, Michael, you've trusted me for your support, you've trusted me to learn to drive in Italy, you've trusted me to learn the language, you've trusted me for all these things. I think you can trust me that Lorna's going to like Italy. And he was right. I loved Italy, and I felt called there myself. But so anyway, we ended up getting married. We had most of our engagement time was a long-distance relationship. You kind of get, and that was back in the day without text, without emails. There was the weekly phone call, and if you disagreed with something, then there was a weekly phone call the next day, too. So, anyway, but it was great planning the wedding without him here, because I kind of got to make all the choices myself. Anyway, after we got married, of course, we moved to Italy, and I instantly fell in love with the people, with the language, with the children, and I studied the language for 2 years, and I understood faster than I could speak the language, and people would ask me a question, and I'd open my mouth to try to respond in my best Italian that I could at the time, and Michael's voice would come out. So I kind of got tired of him talking for me, so I just threw caution to the wind and spoke as well as I could. But I'm really glad that I took the time to learn the language well, because it served me later on in my story, that I needed to know the language and what people were talking about. As we finished up the 2 years of my language study, we were called to another ministry. So we went out under Child Evangelism Fellowship. We lived in one part of Italy, and we were called to do camp ministry, or given the opportunity to do camp ministry in another part of Italy. And we sought counsel from a very dear friend, and he told us that if we were considering such a big change in our lives, that we really needed to seek God, which we were doing, but we needed also to ask God for some specific Bible verses. So we got searching in our quiet time together, in our quiet time alone, and God gave us verses, and we had the verses written out and posted different places in our house. Because this dear friend said that when hard times come, because he said they will, because you're going to be working with people. And I have jokingly said, and anybody that knows me, I've said different times, ministry is great if it wasn't for the people. Okay? So, but he said hard times are going to come, and he said you want to be able to go back to God and say, okay, you gave us this assurance, you gave us this hope, you gave us this direction. Now we've got this situation, you need to help us through it. And so one of the verses that that God gave us that has followed me, and it still follows me today, is the one that was mentioned last night from Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. And there's that word hope. And so it doesn't matter what the circumstances are around us, we have to cling to that hope that we have in God, the hope that he's going to bring us through. So, in fact, I have that plaque, or on a plaque in my office that last year, I'm going to jump just a little bit, but last year I taught grade 7, 8 Bible. And I told the kids all through the book of Acts that we were studying, see God's plan, and God has a plan for you guys. I kind of put it in their minds so much that at the end of the year, one of my students gave me this plaque with beautifully written that verse, because they knew that was my verse. So every day as I'm sitting at my desk, it's right there. I know the plans I have for you. So as we decided that we would take this step and that we'd leave one mission and join another mission and all the rigmarole that goes with it, because nothing in life can be easy. The funny thing is, with the first mission that we were with, we had medical insurance that we had to pay for through our support. When we joined the other mission, they were like, nah, you're on your own. You got to kind of take care of that. Well, in Italy, they had a plan, like the national plan, that we were able to get on, and for the first few years, we did not pay anything. We did not know at the time it was like, oh, we've got to sign up for the national plan. How much is it going to be hard for us to be able to get on it? Because we are foreigners living in the country and blah, blah, blah. But it was all God's plan when you look back on it. Because God had things, he knew things that were going to happen. And these things were going to happen pretty quickly after we had changed ministries. We moved to another city. We set up. We were doing camping ministry, going great guns. And then at the beginning of 2004, our life changed. After winter camp, because even though I wasn't feeling well before winter camp, ministry always comes first. We forget that we need to take care of ourselves so that we can minister. Ladies, and that's something I've learned, and I've learned the hard way. Ministry came first at that point, so after winter camp, we came home, and of course, it takes a few days to rest up after you've been with teenagers for a week. I said to Michael, I said, I am feeling extra tired. I think that we should go see the doctor to see if there's something going on. We went to the doctor. In fact, we walked to the doctor because his office wasn't that far from where we lived. And when we went in, we told him, and we told him we'd walked, and he said, I don't know how you're moving, because he thought right away that I was anemic. And sure enough, he said, I want you to go tomorrow morning for emergency blood test. So I went the day after for the emergency blood test, and then we called him with the results. And he said, you need to make a choice. You either have to go to this hospital that's up in the mountains or this hospital that's in the city. You have no choice. You are very anemic, and you probably need blood transfusions. Remember when I said we went on the national plan, part of God's plan? Because God knew this was going to happen. And so we made the choice to go to the little country hospital up in the mountains because we lived halfway in between the two. And we thought we might get quicker service. And that was all part of God's plan. We went up there and they did some transfusions, if I remember right. That was a long time ago. And I know I was on some iron and things like that, trying to get over it. And they did a biopsy because what my problem was is that I was bleeding. I was having a period all the time. And I had always been a person that had been very irregular. So when we finally got the results back from the biopsy, the doctor said, he used this great big word, and I can't say it in English or Italian because it was so long. But the thing that I remember that day was when he looked at me and he said, "No, non temere." And that is the first song that I learned in Italian. And my throat isn't too dry. I will sing a moment of it. No, non temere, perché io ti ho riscattato, io ho chiamato per nome, which is to say, don't worry, I have rescued you, and I've called you by name. And when the doctor didn't sing, but the doctor said those no, non temere, it was like God was saying to me, I've got your back, Lorna. I've got this. Don't worry. And so there in that doctor's office, even though he would not say the word cancer, because in Italy they're very superstitious that way. They always call it the brutta malattia, the ugly sickness. They never call it the way it is. Anyway, God was saying this to me, and I remember thinking at the time, okay, God, you take care of all the medical stuff, and whatever time you give me, I'm going to enjoy and glorify you. Because that's all I knew how to do. And so what happened, he also said, I can't do the operation here. We don't have the capabilities to do a major operation like that. But I'm going to send you to another city, which was probably an hour and a half away from where we lived. He said, I'm going to send you to another city, and the surgeon that's going to do the surgery is like a brother to me. So I want you to know that I'm sending you to family. Got your back, Lorna. I'm going to take care of it. Don't worry. And so this was in January that this all happened. I couldn't have the surgery till the end of February because that was just the way it was. But I had to go on bed rest, even though they forgot to tell me that. And I ended up having to go on bed rest because I was bleeding so much that they had to put me in the hospital a few days before the surgery to give me blood transfusions. And they would give them to me in the afternoon, and I would sit on the toilet all night and bleed it out. But God still had my back, even though I was tired out, because when we met with the surgeon the day I checked into the hospital, and this has been sort of the assurance that when I look back, that God has always given me. The first thing, the surgeon, after he said, okay, we're going to do a total hysterectomy, we're going to take everything because I don't want to go back in a couple years later and have to take the rest of it. Fine. Okay, now, I'm planning to vacation in Canada. Do you think it's possible for me to go from Alberta to Montreal in a week span? It's like, okay, God, you're using the Canada connection here. Okay, you've got my back. So it was just little things like that that gave me hope that I was in the right place with the right person at the right time. And so I had the operation, and I don't remember much except for just as they were about to put me out, I said, I want you guys to know that there are people all around the world praying for you in the surgery. And then I was out of it. The next thing I remember is calling for drugs. And I called for it in Italian, but I didn't think they were hearing me, so I called for it in English too. Anyway, that, and I remember Michael standing by my bedside and trying to comfort me, and his voice was so annoying at the time. So I kind of told him to shut up. Anyway, I'm glad that through all this, that God always had my back, because sometimes, even though we are all like the family of God, sometimes some of us are a bit like Job's comforters, because I had a woman call up after I got home from the hospital and say to Michael, so Lorna must be feeling like half a woman, like the Old Testament woman, barren. And of course, anybody that knows me well. You can only imagine what I did the next day when I got out of bed. I said to Michael, I can't decide which half is going to be woman today. Or another dear saint of God that cornered me one Sunday morning and said, well, I guess we can't count on you to grow the Sunday school. The joke was back on her because I might not have produced the children to be in Sunday school, but I taught them. So anyway, I've learned through it all to find humor. Because if going through chemo the first time wasn't bad enough, that you lost all your hair, I remember having some ladies say to me, oh, Lorna, don't worry, your hair will grow back. And I said, yeah, I know, I'm more worried about what it's going to do to my heart, kidneys, like that's the other things. I said, the hair part, in fact, ladies, I'm praying that it's going to grow back red. And they looked at me and they were like, what? I said, look, if I've got to go through this, I might as well make a request. So, anyway, but I remember, even though I was in Italy going through all of this, my family not once said, come on home. Come back to Canada. Do everything in Canada. And I never once thought about it because God had placed me in the Italian system. And they take care of their cancer patients really well over there. I didn't pay for anything, ladies. I did not pay for CAT scans. I did not pay for chemotherapy. I did not pay for anything. I was right where God wanted me. Was it hard? Yeah, it was hard being away from family. But do you know what the hardest part was? When I was going through chemotherapy, my mother here in Canada fell and broke her leg. That was hard not to be able to come home and be with my mom. She didn't need me, but my father probably needed me more than she did. All of a sudden, he had to learn to do more than boil water. But anyway, but I was where God wanted me to be. And that's the only place I could be that was the safest and best place for me. But I remember when I'd call my parents, they would kind of fight who was going to get to talk to me first. And it was usually my dad. And I didn't learn until, because he ended up dying a year later, and we happened to be in Canada. That's another whole story, the way God undertook for that. And I remember afterwards some of my cousins telling me how worried my dad was. My dad never let me know how concerned he was. I kind of knew it when I look back, because, he was I called one day for a recipe from my mother. He said, what do you need your mother for? I said, I need a recipe. Well, what recipe? Okay, Dad, you don't cook. So I told him the recipe, and he's like, well, now I think you do this, this, and this. And I'm like, can I talk to Mom? But one of the words of wisdom that my father told me at the time, he said, we're going to pray through this because this is God's plan for our family at this time to go through it. You're not alone over there, Lorna. God's with you. We're here in Canada praying for you. We're going to get through it. So, after 2 years of remission and every 6 months checkup, I got the nice surprise that I was going to go through it all again. The cancer was back, the same type of cancer, so they knew how to treat it. I was able to get the same surgeon, was able to do it. So this time I didn't lose as much hair, but I will share this. The first time when I lost my hair, of course, being in camp ministry, I was doing chemo too during the summer, so I'd be at the camp. And this one little guy was in the office one day, and I always wore hats. And he said to me, Lorna. I said, yeah, Mateo. And he says, are you wearing a hat because the last time you went to the hairdresser, they did a bad job? And I said, no, Mateo. And I explained a little bit about it. But anyway. So we went through it again. I will say, and then I didn't share this before, but when we had to hook up with an oncologist in our city, where we did the operation in another city, an hour and a half from where we lived, when we hooked up with the oncologist, when we called his house, because that's what we were told we should do, because his wife made all his appointments, I didn't know at the time, neither did Michael, that he was the mayor of the city. And he was also the head oncologist. Sometimes it's kind of cool to have blind faith and just go with it. Like somebody handed us a number and said, call this number, you should be able to talk to him. Anyway, he was an oncologist for the love of being an oncologist, not for the paycheck. That man, at one point, because I always had ports put in to do the chemo through, and they had taken one out, and 6 months later, I needed it again. So instead of putting it, he said, we need to get you onto chemo quickly. So they were going to put a pick in my arm. And so we went into this other building, and he stood with me for 2 hours, or by my bed, and he would rub my hand and talk to me. Like, the bedside manner was, like, I love that man dearly for how he supported me through things. Anyway, so I went through that and then continued on with life, because that's what you do until you're dead. And I want to jump ahead to 5 years later. I was almost to the point of graduating to that 1-year checkup. And it was back. And I was unable to have the same surgeon because he had retired. And so we ended up going to a totally different city, different hospital, and the surgeon I ended up meeting, he kept wanting to put the surgery off so that the tumor, this time, it was the same type of cancer, but the tumor was on my urethra tube, which goes from the kidney to the bladder. I've learned so much biology stuff. I never took biology in high school, don't like it, but I know all about some of the internal workings, sort of. Anyway, so they had to put a tube in there to hold it open, but he kept putting off the surgery, and the tumor had grown by that time to be a star. So when he finally did it, we went in, or I was in the hospital. Of course, my surgeries always ended up being during the summer when camp was going on, so a lot of times Michael couldn't be with me. And so, but he was there the day of the surgery. So I got back to my room. We found out that they had opened me and closed me. Yeah, that's never good when they say that. And it's because they'd lost me almost twice on the table, because they had overdosed me, although they will not admit it. They overdosed me with the anesthesia. And I should have known that morning, because the anesthesiologist in the pre-surgery room, she was having a bad day. Like, she was just grumpy. I felt sorry for everybody else. I forgot to feel sorry for myself, that she was going to be pumping me with stuff. But she was having a bad day. They would not, so they overdosed me, basically. And so he just didn't do anything. He didn't take a biopsy. He didn't do anything. So I ended up sleeping a lot of the time. I did not have the energy to even answer my cell phone. And poor Michael kept calling, and I'm like, I just can't talk. Until finally we had missionary friends that lived right across from the hospital, and she would come over and visit me, and she said, please call your husband and let him know you're okay. But I really didn't feel okay. I knew God still had my back. But I did kind of, like, the hope was kind of weaning. But anyway, finally when the toxins started to get out of my liver a bit, that I was alert enough, one day the surgeon happened to come by to see me. And I had, I guess that morning, taken my courage pill, because I looked the man in the face and I said, why? Why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you take anything? And you know what his response was? We know what's going to happen. This is your third cancer. Go home, live your life, do some chemo. And I sat there in the chair across the room from him, and I thought, I am so glad you are not God. God's going to make that decision when he's going to call me home. And I'm still here. So I went home, or I went back to the camp. And Michael was talking to somebody, and they concocted this stuff that you drink, aloe vera, and it's supposed to cleanse your liver. I don't recommend it. I don't care what they put in with it, I don't recommend it. But I got better. I ended up in the fall going to see my oncologist and explained what happened to him. And he said, well, you need an operation. And I looked at him with all the courage I had. I said, so, if you were in my place, what would you do? Usually they don't want to tell you that. But he looked at me and he says, you know what I think I would do? I would just do some chemotherapy and do the operation later. I said, good, that's what we'll do. So he called in, finally, the surgeon from our hospital, who had studied in Montreal, the Canada connection. That other one that told me go home, he didn't have anything to do with Canada. I should have seen that as a red flag to begin with. Anyway, so it was decided that that fall I would do chemotherapy to try to just shrink the thing and for me to get my confidence back up to be able to go into the operating room again. So in February of that year, my oncologist called me in the office. He said, okay, it's now time. I said, okay, I'm ready now. Let's do this. And then we had a freak storm in Italy that paralyzed everything for about 6 weeks. Because over there, normally where we lived, well, actually you had to see the people. We ended up having to go buy a snow shovel at the local hardware store. We paid $40 in euro. So the exchange rate, we probably paid 100 Canadian. Anyway, anyway, I finally had the surgery in April. So it took them a few months to get the backlog. And things went well. I did more chemotherapy, lost my hair again. But I got to tell you, my coworker, the very first time, she'd had some breast cancer before me, and some people from the States had sent her some wigs. And for her, losing her hair was a very big thing, although in the end, somebody told me all she lost was right there. Anyway, so she wanted me to wear the wig. So I graciously took the wig, and I tried it on, and I gave it back to her. And I said, no, I don't think wigs are for me. I felt like I had a dead cat on my head. So I stuck with hats. Or you could have seen me with a clown wig now and again at the camp, but anyway. Instead of wearing wigs, I chose to wear big, ugly earrings that my sister-in-law would send to me. I mean, they were big. Anyway, so I did chemo again, and we were planning to come home that year for Christmas, because we would try to come home every other year to see family. And it was October 31st, I just remember that day, and they told me it was still there some. But they said, this time, instead of more chemo, we're going to hook it up to do radiation. And this was another God having my back and letting me know it. My oncologist said, radiation is the best type of treatment for your type of cancer. Okay. And I have put that through my mind because once you've had it, you kind of, every little ache and pain, it's like, oh, is that cancer? Is it back? But I keep thinking, nope, that oncologist said that. So in December of 2012, December 19th, I did my last radiation. The next day, we got on a plane to come to Canada. And that's another whole story, that we almost got to stay at Buckingham Palace. Actually, it wasn't our fault, we missed our flight, and the guy said, well, you're going to have to stay here in London until after the holidays. And I said, unless you book me into Buckingham Palace with the Queen, you better find me a flight to Canada. Don't mess with a lady in a wheelchair. So, I had my last treatment in 2012, and this year, in May, I went for another whole story, is the way that God has undertaken. When I came back to Canada 6 years ago, I know people here in the province don't have doctors. God provided me with a family doctor, who then found me an oncologist, and the oncologist found me a surgeon, if I needed it. Because you're still, even though the cancer's not there, you're still living with all the extra stuff from operations and chemo and stuff like that. I will tell you, I had one surgeon, the last surgeon that touched my body, opened me up. He told me he rearranged a few things down there that hadn't been put back right. I didn't ask, and I don't want the map. So, in May this year, I went and saw the oncologist for my yearly checkup. And he walked in the room, just walked in by himself, no file folders, no nothing. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And he said, it's been 10 years since you've had any treatments. He said, I'm kicking you out of oncology. All praise to God. And so, in December of this coming year, because it will be officially the 10 years that I have not had done treatment, if you're around Chris Bam Sis, I'm throwing a party. 10 years free. If only my story ended there. We continued on ministry, and I will tell you, ministry, pray for your missionaries, because just like you can't pick your family that you're born into, you can't pick your family you're going into to minister with. And we had some real struggles with the people we ministered with. But we knew we were in God's plan, we knew we were in God's place, and we kept that in mind. They were going to retire, and they wanted to be able to go home. I surmised this. I said to Michael, I said, this is what their plan is. I think too much sometimes. That they wanted to go home and tell people that they'd left everything into the hands of the Italians. So during one of my times of doing chemotherapy the last time, they fixed it so that we were no longer needed at the camp, and they had found Italians to take over. And they also told us that we probably should just leave the country because they were leaving. But God had other plans. We had worked with other missions, so another mission said, no, we want you guys to come as with us. And God has a plan. You might not always understand it, but you just kind of got to go with it. It's like getting in the car and going for a ride. It's like you don't know where you're going to end up, but you know you're going to be okay because God's there. He's doing it. He's driving. And it's the best adventure because you get to reconnect with people that you didn't think you'd ever connect with. So in 2016, Michael, one day, he said, I'm not feeling well. So we ended up taking him to the hospital on a Monday. And Tuesday night, just after midnight, he went home to heaven. So here I was, no children, but I had a lovely church family. All my family were over here. Dying in another country, I was like, oh, okay. Michael always said he wanted to die because he really liked the Italian coffins. If you think I'm weird, you should have met him. Anyway, so he passed away quickly. I remember the doctor coming out after they had tried to resuscitate him 3 times and the 3rd time out. And she said, do you need some tranquilizers? And I'm like, no. I said, he's home in heaven. Was it fun for me? No. Do I miss him? Yes. Are there a few things I need to say to him? Uh-huh. But I wouldn't wish him back because that would be selfish. And so I just got to share this a little bit about the Italian thing. We had to have permission from the city to have the funeral. They kind of take a lot of your planning. So I took a couple of people with me to the funeral home, which is just really at the funeral store, because the body lays out in the morgue, and they don't embalm them over there. So that was an interesting little tidbit. Anyway, so we had the funeral, and this was in April, and our visa to stay in the country had run out, or was running out. And for some reason, God, we hadn't sent in our renewal for passports and all that stuff. So I had all my paperwork there. God just went before me, and I was able to pack up, get rid of. Michael had been there almost 25 years. He was just a couple weeks short, and he was so looking forward to his 25th anniversary of having been on the mission field full time. I had been there 17 years, so all of a sudden, all my married life had been there. My ministry, so I lost my married life, my life, the culture I knew, or I was going to, and my ministry. And that could have kind of freaked me out. I could have balled up on the sofa, but I didn't. I kept hearing Michael say, put on your big girl panties and get on with life. And so, and when I look back, it was God. It was miraculous. I was able to do all the paperwork I had to do, get rid of all of our things I had to. I was able to rent a container. God supplied the funds for that. I was able to do this and fly out on July 20th, exactly 3 months after he passed away. It was God. God did it. And I just was like, okay, God, we're going to do it. The only thing I ask is when I get back to Canada, you need to make it that I can work with kids. Like, you'll know I'll die if and I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm not a call center type of person. A little cubicle is not my thing. Anyway, so I said, God, that's the only thing I ask you to do. I will say that one thing, God had little surprises, and so did Michael, and so did a couple of dear friends of mine, that they were going to come over and visit me in May. They came over, but we didn't kind of do what they kind of had planned, because Michael had promised to take them to Rome and Venice and wherever else he promised, because I don't know, I wasn't in on it, because it was a surprise. But they came over and they helped me pack boxes and boxes and boxes. We did do the touristy thing a couple days, and I will ever be grateful for people like that in my life. They gave me hope. They breathed something into me that refreshed me, and that's what we need, is people. Anyway, about a month after he passed away, my sister-in-law, who lives in Quispamsis, New Brunswick, and I always said I would never live in Quispamsis, because I didn't want to have to spell it, let alone say it. But the God who has my back also has a sense of humor. So my sister-in-law wrote me and she said, look, here at the school, we are starting an after-school program in the fall. I think you would be perfect for it. I was still busy boxing and getting containers and stuff. I didn't have time to think of it until I got back to Canada. And she'd already found me an apartment and secured me the job. Do you know the beautiful thing about it is Michael and I had no memories in Quispamsis other than my brother's family and where they lived, but they tended to change houses. My brother and them tended to change houses every time we were on furlough. It was like learning a new direction to their house. And we would go and spend 1 week with their kids, just be aunt and uncle. No ministry, no nothing. So it seemed like the Lord opening the door for me to do that. No memories, fresh start. And sometimes that's hard because you want to share something about Michael, but they don't really know him. But that's okay. They're getting to know me, whether they want to or not. But God's got my back. He's had my back through all of this. I'm in a different season of my life. I never did work full-time in the after school. They put me back in preschool. But that's okay. I was able to go over and before COVID, and I haven't started yet, but I'm planning to go over once a week and teach the Bible to the after-school kids. Pour into them. And I've had opportunities to share with them because kids ask questions. They know about my cancer. They know about Michael being in heaven. And one boy who comes from a troubled home, he used to say to me all the time, I just don't get it. Terry Fox is dead. You're alive. And I would say, Hayden, God has a plan. And his plan was for you to be part of my life, and whether you want it or not, for me to be part of yours. And that's the way it is. I want you to know, the month before Michael passed away, I had this burning desire, because I've got 2 nieces and a nephew that live in Quispamsis. And 1 week every 2 years, for me, didn't seem enough to be able to pour into them. And I remember exactly where I was sitting in our apartment. I remember where Michael was sitting. And I said to him, Michael, I have this burning desire to pour more into the lives of Elizabeth, Jessica, and Cameron. Not knowing that God was preparing my heart for 1 month later to lose Michael and to live in Quispamsis. And I get to pour into their lives every day because I see them at school every day. So what happened is after COVID hit, I was let go from the daycare because that's just the way life happens. And just the way life happens, God has plans. And so when school took back in, the administrator that was at the school no longer felt like she wanted to be there because her husband was immune compromised. But unbeknownst to me, she suggested that they hire me. And anyway, after a few weeks of when I finally realized they weren't hiring me back at the daycare, I was like, okay, God, what do you got planned for me? I feel that I need to be staying here in the area. And he used my sister-in-law to say, just cool it. God's got a plan. It's all going to work out. I'm like, okay. So I am now the administrator for a Christian school in the Quispamsis area. I love my job. I love troubleshooting. I love helping. I'm right where God wants me to be. I get to go into the daycare and say hi to all the little kids, and then I get to leave. I love it. I love the students. I have the recess gang, I call them, that I've got some from grade middle school and high schoolers that come to my office every recess just to hang out with me. And we talk about whatever. The other week we were talking about hunting and things like that. But I just feel so blessed. And it gives me hope for the future, hope for what God still has for me. I love it. I love that He's got my back and that He's with me. And yesterday on my way up, I drove up myself, and I was just listening to music, and I was just letting it pour over me. And there's one song that I just want to read the lyrics. It's called Trust His Heart. All things work for our good, though sometimes we don't see how they could. Struggles that break our hearts in two sometimes blind us to the truth. Our Father knows what's best for us. His ways are not our own. So when your pathway grows dim and you just don't see Him, remember, you're never alone. God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when you don't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, trust His heart. He sees the master plan. He holds our future in His hands. So don't live as those who have no hope. All our hope is found in Him. We see the present clearly, but He sees the first and the last. And like a tapestry, He's weaving you and me to someday be just like Him. God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when you don't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, trust His heart. And that's all I can do every day. Trust that when Beth contacted me last week, He wanted me to do this. I prefer to be troubleshooting and helping behind the scenes than necessarily being in front. But there is such hope. Another song that was the hymn, "My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness." And that's what our hope has to be built on. Because others are going to let us down. Things aren't going to go. Life isn't perfect. But life happens. And it matters how we deal with the life that happens to us. That's my motto. Like, I'll have parents call up and they'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, life happens. That's okay. God's got our backs. And we can hope in Him, all that He's done for us.